Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 10 important articles for a detailed analysis. We have 4 articles which are very important for both prelims and mains, and we have 6 small articles that are very important for the prelims exam. Now, before I start the discussion, there are few things I would like to mention. Today is a very important day for UPSC aspirants because yesterday the prelims examination was conducted, as you all know, and today marks a new journey, a new beginning for UPSC aspirants. Those of you who have scored well, who are scoring 95 and above, you can be rest assured that you might very well clear the prelims. So you need to get started with your mains preparation. And for others who may have scored 90 and below, don't feel dejected. This is just a new beginning. You need to introspect. You need to identify the weak areas. You need to identify where you went wrong, and you need to restart your preparation. So for both sets of students, current affairs will play a critical role, be it for the next attempt when you prepare for 2025 prelims, or be it for those preparing for the upcoming mains in September 2024. Now, our intention is to help both the category of students through these free sessions on our YouTube channel. The Daily Hindu Analysis is one such initiative to provide a one-stop destination for you to prepare for your current affairs, both for prelims and mains. So I hope our initiatives are helping you. Yesterday, we have conducted the paper analysis as well, and you can go and watch these sessions. So if you are liking our initiatives, do support us through your likes, comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And also let me know in the comments, what score are you expecting based on the answer key that we have provided. Now let's look at the first article that we are going to discuss today. The first article is related to the Swiss Peace Summit that took place over the last couple of days in order to bring a negotiated end to the Ukraine conflict. India was one of the participating countries, and according to this headline, India has refused to endorse the joint communique which was issued at the end of the peace summit which was held in Switzerland. Now, before I take up a detailed discussion of this topic, which is very important, we have a very important announcement. Since prelims examination has been concluded and the journey towards mains and the next attempt begins, we are launching new batches from next week onwards. There is a new English, Hindi and as well as bilingual batch which will be starting from next week, and you can enroll for these courses at just 24,999. So those interested can contact the number provided on the screen. Now coming back to the article, let's understand what is India's position on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Let's also talk about the Swiss Peace Summit that was held, and let's explore this topic in detail so that if there is any question, be it prelims or mains question, you should be in a position to answer them. So first, let me set the context. The Swiss Peace Summit was being pushed by Ukraine from several months. In fact, it was proposed by Ukrainian leader, the president of Ukraine, Zelensky. Switzerland, being a neutral country in geopolitics, had agreed to host the summit to bring around 80 countries together to discuss the future of Ukraine and also to hold Russia accountable for the alleged war crimes it has committed in Ukraine and to look after the humanitarian situation in Ukraine. This peace summit was based on a peace plan proposed by Ukraine itself. Zelensky a few months ago had proposed a peace plan which would bring about a ceasefire and a negotiated settlement in line with the principles of the UN Charter. Because a couple of years ago when Russia invaded Ukraine, it clearly violated the principles of UN Charter by threatening the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Violation of a country's sovereignty, violation of a country's territorial integrity is in violation of the UN Charter itself. And Russia, no doubt, is in violation of these principles of the UN Charter. In fact, even India has recognized that these principles of the UN Charter cannot be violated. A country cannot simply take over the territory of another country through aggression, through violence. So India also discourages such acts of violence. But however, India has maintained a balanced position on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Given how critical Russia is for India, and also given the fact that Russia has always stood with India during difficult times, Russia has been an all-weather friend for India. Plus, India has a dependency on Russia with regard to defense supplies. And of late, Russia has become a major oil supplier to India, as India has been buying the discounted Russian oil, as Russia is struggling to bypass the Western economic sanctions. So India maintains this balanced position on the conflict, and we need to explore this in slight detail. So ever since this war began, India has usually not criticized Russia directly. We have never called this an act of aggression. We have never held Russia accountable for the violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. However, India has expressed concern about the situation, about the humanitarian situation, and also the violation of principles of UN Charter. Apart from that, India has not really made any strong comments, and India has in a way enabled Russia as well by bypassing the Western sanctions and by continuing its economic relationship with Russia. We procured the S-400 missiles, the air defense system, and we even bought Russian oil at a discounted price, and India became one of the largest buyers of Russian oil. Today, Russia has become one of the largest oil suppliers to India. So this has attracted a lot of criticism from Western countries against India. Western governments have been critical of India's position, but this is how India has to balance its position because there are important national interests at stake. For India, it is important to maintain good ties with the West by showing some kind of support, humanitarian support to Ukraine. At the same time, it is equally important, or rather slightly more important, to maintain those strategic ties with Russia. If you look at the past, if you look at the history of India-Soviet relationship, India-Russia relationship, Soviet Union and later Russia, they have always stood with India. Be it the Kashmir issue, be it the liberation of Goa from Portugal, or be it the border dispute with China, be it weapon supplies, defense and military hardware to India, and also India's nuclear and space program. Russia has been one of the few countries in the world which has consistently stood with India. So of course, India can't compromise those relations. India can't compromise its national interests. So we did not criticize Russia for its act of aggression. And at every global platform, whenever a voting took place or whenever a resolution was brought up against Russia, India would abstain from these votes. This has been a consistent position that India has maintained. For example, at UN General Assembly, UN Security Council, even at the International Atomic Energy Agency, and also at the UN Human Rights Council. At all these global organizations, resolutions were brought up against Russia, and during the voting, India abstained from all these votes, thus taking a middle path. And by bypassing the sanctions and by continuing our strategic economic relations with Russia, in a way we have sided with Russia as well. So, to continue our support for Ukraine, to balance out our relations with the West, India does express concern about the humanitarian situation, and we have given a call for a negotiated end to this conflict. India has always stated that negotiations are the only way forward to bring this conflict to an end. So at the Swiss Peace Summit that was held, India was one of the countries that was invited, and India did participate. So India's participation itself is a very big development. India's participation at the Swiss Peace Summit in itself indicates the balanced position of India, because India could have easily skipped the invite. For example, countries like China was also invited, but China skipped participating in the Swiss Peace Summit, thus showing its clear alignment with Russia. In fact, this China-Russia axis has already created a lot of concern for Western governments. So it wouldn't have been appropriate for India to skip the summit. But however, to strike a balance, India did not participate at the summit level. When I say summit level, it involves participation of head of states and head of governments. If India's Prime Minister or President would have participated, then that would have shown a greater tilt towards Ukraine, towards Western countries. In fact, the invite that was sent by Ukraine and Switzerland was for Prime Minister Narendra Modi to participate. But PM Modi chose to skip the peace summit, and instead a diplomatic delegation comprising of senior diplomats from the Ministry of External Affairs, they represented India in a official capacity. So there was official representation from India, but at a lower level comprising of official delegation. And the Prime Minister did not participate, thus striking a balance as far as the symbolic gesturing was concerned. So by doing this, we have sent a message to Russia that we would not encourage any unilateral settlement of the conflict. At the same time, we have sent a message to Ukraine and the West that India will not be a mute spectator. Rather, we will participate in a positive manner to ensure that there is a negotiated end to this conflict. But eventually, at the end of the peace summit, a joint statement was issued by all the participating countries. In this joint communique, there has been criticism of Russia's aggression, its violation of human rights and the alleged war crimes. But however, India decided to abstain from endorsing the joint statement because India believes that any settlement of this conflict should be jointly agreed between Russia and Ukraine. This was India's position when India decided not to sign the joint statement, not to endorse the joint statement. In fact, not just India, even few other countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Indonesia, Thailand, South Africa, these countries as well, which are middle powers, which have good ties with both Russia and the West, even they have taken a position similar to India. Even they did not endorse the joint statement, and India stated that our participation is a signal that we want a negotiated settlement. But however, it can't come unilaterally. Ukraine and Western countries can't decide how the conflict will end. Russia should also be a participant. Now that is a very important point. Russia was not invited to the peace summit. Russia was not invited to the peace summit. One possible reason is because Russian President Putin could not have traveled to Switzerland where the peace summit was held. It was held at Bergenstock in Switzerland because Russian President Putin has an arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court. And Switzerland is a signatory to the Rome Statute that established the International Criminal Court. So if Putin were to step into Switzerland and its territory and step onto Swiss soil, Swiss authorities would be obligated under Rome Statute to arrest Russian President Putin. So since that is not viable, obviously Russia was not invited, and even if it were to be invited, Russia was unlikely to participate. So India's argument is that without Russia's involvement, there can't be a peaceful conclusion to this conflict. This, again, is a very reasonable position that India has taken. It might appear that we are simply backing Russia. That's not the case. This is a very logical stand of India that if any settlement has to be worked out and through negotiations, if the conflict has to be settled, it requires the participation of both the sides which are fighting this conflict. Of course, India knows very well that Russia was the aggressor, but we wouldn't risk blaming it entirely on Russia in order to protect our relations with Russia. But as far as ending the conflict is concerned, India's position is very logical. It is in line with international principles that both the parties should be part of any negotiated settlement. You can't have a unilateral settlement of the conflict where Ukraine and Western countries are working out a peace process. That will never work. It can never be implemented without Russia's cooperation and participation. So India's position with regard to abstaining from the joint statement was that any peace process should include both Russia and Ukraine. So this highlights the balanced position that India has been taking with regard to this conflict. Even in the previous months, India has been actively participating in all the global events which are striving to bring peace between Russia and Ukraine. Few months ago, there were conferences held at the level of national security advisors and deputy NSAs in Jeddah and as well as in Davos. And India participated. India's NSA and deputy NSAs participated in these events. And we positively contributed to the deliberations, which would help in bringing an end to this conflict. And as I told you, our position to abstain from all these votes that seem to target Russia is a very balanced position of India that maintains our good relations with Russia while striking a balance with the West. So this is what we need to understand from these important articles that were there in today's newspaper. Now, during the peace summit, the focus was on three important agendas. That's the last point. Three important agendas were outlined during the peace summit. One was nuclear safety, because there has been intense fighting between Russia and Ukraine very close to nuclear sites and nuclear power plants. You might have heard about the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, also the Chernobyl nuclear disaster site, where intense fighting took place between Russia and Ukraine, and there has always been a risk of a nuclear accident. In fact, even now, near Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, intense fighting does occur between Russian and Ukrainian forces. So ensuring nuclear safety in this conflict has become a global concern, and International Atomic Energy Agency has been closely monitoring the nuclear sites. The other focus was global food security, because both Russia and Ukraine are major suppliers of food grains. They are critical for food security. They keep up the global food supply chain. Ever since the war has broken out, it has disrupted the flow of food grains from Ukraine and Russia, leading to food insecurity in many developing, underdeveloped countries. In fact, even in yesterday's prelims, UPSC asked a question on International Grains Council. Because of this reason, because the Russia-Ukraine war has disrupted food shipments, and International Grains Council deals with supply of food grains and enforces the Grain Trade Convention. So that is why all these topics, these developing stories are very crucial for our exam. And finally, the other focal point of the peace summit was the humanitarian situation. The humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, which has been perpetuated by Russia. The alleged war crimes that have been committed, the large-scale destruction of Ukrainian critical infrastructure, because Russia has been accused of targeting electricity grids, power plants, water supply, in order to cripple the daily life of Ukrainians. And these amount to war crimes as well, when civilian infrastructure and essential infrastructure is targeted. So these were the prime issues that were discussed at the peace summit, and a joint statement has been adopted where almost 74 countries out of the 80 participating nations have signed the joint statement. Only 6 countries with India have stayed out of it, and India's position is very simple, that you can't have a negotiated end to this war without the involvement of both the parties, both Russia and Ukraine. So based on this, you can expect a mains question. Let's take a look at this. Let me provide you a basic structure as well, so that you can start working on your answer writing skills, especially those who are preparing for the upcoming mains. I think these practice questions would be immensely helpful. So in every Hindu analysis session, we'll try to include as many practice questions as possible and briefly discuss the structure as well, so that the inputs would be very important for you to build your answer writing skills. Only those proposals which are acceptable to both Russia and Ukraine can lead to lasting peace. Evaluate the statement and India's position on the conflict in the context of the recently held Swiss Peace Summit. So how do you start your answer? In the introduction, you can set the context, maybe provide a brief background about the Russia-Ukraine war. In one small paragraph, you can explain the Russia-Ukraine war, how Russia invaded Ukraine, what humanitarian situation has been created here, right? And even hint at the instigation of the Western countries which pushed Russia to attack Ukraine. Essentially, the Russian attack against Ukraine was a result of instigation by the West, by NATO, by US. So you need to present this entire analysis in one small paragraph, just a brief background regarding why Russia invaded the country, what really happened, and what is the consequence of this war. So once you set out the context, then in the body, you can start talking about the position that India has taken. The position that India has taken over the last 2 years. You can explain how we have bypassed the Western sanctions because we never follow unilateral Western sanctions. Usually, India does not follow unilateral sanctions imposed by few countries. You can mention the strategic ties with Russia, the historical relations with Russia, the need to maintain that strategic relationship, and why India has taken a very balanced position on the conflict. You can point out how India has bought Russian oil at a discounted price and in a way benefited the Indian economy as well. You can also point out how India has abstained from all the votes at global bodies which were critical of Russia, be it UN General Assembly, UN Security Council, the UN Human Rights Council. At all these platforms, India has abstained from the vote, thus sending a clear message to both the sides. We have not openly favored Russia as well. We have not taken a side with the Western countries as well, and we have struck that middle ground. So this is where India's interests lie. And you can point out that there can never be an end to this conflict without the involvement of Russia and Ukraine. If a ceasefire has to be achieved and if a resolution has to be worked out, Russia and Ukraine have to be part of any such agreement. So you can talk about the Swiss Peace Summit, which has been mentioned in the question. Maybe you can give some background about the Swiss Peace Summit as well, and then explain India's position that both Russia and Ukraine have to be part of any such proposal to end this conflict. That's the reason why India chose to participate at a diplomatic level, but we chose not to sign the joint statement. We have not endorsed the joint statement that was adopted, because India abstained as it believes that any end to this conflict should involve both Russia and Ukraine. So bring out this position of India and you can conclude your answer. You can provide a way forward. Maybe you can quote Prime Minister Modi. A few months ago, when PM Modi met Vladimir Putin during the G20 summit in Bali, PM Modi made a very popular statement. It attracted global headlines as well. PM Modi urged President Putin to end the war and stated that this is not the time for war, as the global economy was disrupted by the pandemic and also by the conflict. This statement by PM Modi attracted global headlines. So you can state that this is not the time for war or conflict. The world is already in chaos. There are enough situations going on in the world, and the world doesn't need one more long-lasting conflict. So there has to be a negotiated settlement. You need to uphold the principles of UN Charter as well. You can point out that no matter what the trigger or instigation, no country can violate the territorial integrity and sovereignty of another nation. Right? India can't support Russia's territorial aggression against Ukraine, because tomorrow that will weaken our position at the UN if China were to threaten India's territorial integrity. Tomorrow, if we go and complain to the world that China is threatening our sovereignty and territorial integrity, nobody would support India, because if India would have completely backed Russian aggression. That's why we are very careful, very cautious. We are not backing the Russian aggression against Ukraine entirely or explicitly. We are not supportive of any breach of territorial integrity and sovereignty, which is a violation of principles of UN Charter. So just present this as your conclusion, and this makes a very good answer, and this should be more than sufficient. Now let's look at the next article. I'm taking up a column that was published in the supplement that deals with education sector. The Hindu carries this supplement page called Education Plus. I know this is a little unconventional. Usually these articles may not be relevant for the exam. But today there is a very interesting, very important article that is actually directly connected to our syllabus. With regard to education under GS paper 2, and also with regard to science and technology under GS paper 3. this topic finds relevance. So let's take a quick look at what the column is trying to bring up. This column is mainly highlighting the need for data literacy. The column is calling for greater awareness amongst our students, especially in the field of higher education, starting right from the primary level to higher education. The writers of the column are calling for greater digital adoption, data literacy amongst our students in order to prepare them for the future, in order to prepare them for the digital revolution which is already taking place. I'm sure all of you know that we have already entered the fourth stage of the industrial revolution. If the first stage of the industrial revolution was powered by steam and coal back in 1800s, today the fourth stage of the industrial revolution is powered by critical emerging technologies such as AI, artificial intelligence, particularly generative AI like ChatGPT, DALL-E and others, and other associated technologies like big data, data analytics, data analysis. So these technologies, right, they will drive the economic activities of the future. In fact, their adoption has already started on a massive scale. But the problem in a country like India is that our students are not prepared. Right? Tomorrow, if our students graduate and if they're looking for jobs in the job market, if they're trying to enter the job market, they would realize that they don't have the right skills, they don't have the right practical experience, especially in such emerging technologies, and they lack data literacy in general, which makes them unemployable in the tech industry. Not just in the tech industry, even across sectors. In a few years, AI, big data would be widely adopted. In fact, we already have several sectors, several companies in India which have already started adopting AI platforms, big data, data analytic tools. So today it has become very difficult to secure a job in any industry or any sector without having some basic expertise in these domains. Now these skills, they have to be taught from a very young age. Data literacy and data awareness is essential with a good foundation in these technologies, which should begin from our schooling years. And especially when students enter higher education, there should be greater promotion of data literacy amongst our students so that they are employable, they are fit for the job market, because the demands of the job market is drastically changing. Unlike few years ago, where simply a degree was sufficient to get a job, today things are very different. Most industry experts, they argue that our students who are graduating even from the top engineering colleges, even from IITs, NITs, they lack the practical experience. They don't have employable skills. So this is one critical gap that India is going to face if we do not address data literacy right from the beginning. So let's look at a very important report that is mentioned in this article. The World Economic Forum brings out a very important report called the Future of Jobs Report. Please write this down. Make a note of this. This can be important for prelims. The Future of Jobs Report brought out by World Economic Forum last year. According to this report, there is a rapid increase in data-related roles in the job market. Now, you might assume that such skills and such knowledge is necessary only in the IT industry and in engineering. Don't be under this assumption, because today AI and data tools are being employed in every single industry, even in medical industry, for example. So doctors would be expected to be proficient in data analysis. It has already become a necessity. Even in social sciences, in humanities, in services, in manufacturing, even in agriculture. So across sectors, AI and other critical emerging technologies will find an application. So data literacy will no longer be an option. It's not just a basic skill that you would like to have. It would become an absolute necessity for everyone. Even for those who are already employed, they need to undergo upskilling. Right? Those who already are employed, right? They will get outdated if they do not get access to data literacy. So it's important to promote greater awareness about the required skills and also provide the required practical experience in data analysis, in big data, and in artificial intelligence tools, right? To ensure that our labor market, our labor force is prepared for the upcoming challenges in the future economy. So this report points out that almost 75% of the companies in the world, they have already planned a large-scale adoption of these critical emerging technologies. All your big companies, right, across industries, across sectors, they have already started adopting these technologies, which basically means if you do not have basic digital literacy and if you don't have the basic skills, you are not going to get a job. Even if you get a job, it won't be very lucrative as far as your career progression is concerned. So this is where a critical gap is identified by the writers. The writers are pointing out that in our education system, there is a major gap when it comes to data literacy amongst our students. There was a recent study conducted by NASSCOM. NASSCOM is an industry level association. According to NASSCOM report, there is a 51% gap between demand and supply for roles in AI, machine learning, big data, data analysis. Meaning, there are several job openings in India's industry for AI roles, data analysis roles, big data roles. But the industries are not finding the right talent. They are facing a shortage of skilled talent because India's youth, our students, our workforce, they have not received adequate data literacy and data-based education. This is a critical gap that needs to be fixed in our education system. So the learning has to begin at a very early age, starting right from a primary education, and this should be imparted professionally at higher education level. So this is something which needs to be done, which needs to be inculcated. Integrating data literacy into our education system has become a necessity. It's no longer an option. See, in many colleges, many universities, there are these optional elective subjects available, from cybersecurity to artificial intelligence, big data, etc. Students have a lot of interest as well. But problem is they are only imparting theoretical knowledge. They are teaching from books in a classroom, making students just understand the concepts, mug up the definitions, but none of them have practical experience. If they are given a large data set to analyze, they can't really interpret the data or they can't utilize the data in a productive manner. This applies not just for engineering students, it applies for students from other categories as well. So this is where we need to fine-tune our education system at the primary level, at the middle, higher level as well, especially in higher specialized education. There should be greater focus on practical experience. Our students should be exposed to real-world data, real-world problems, so that they are employable, they have the right skills to find the right job in the market of the future. That is exactly what the writers are calling for. Instead of just training them in classrooms, and instead of limiting them to a classroom environment and a college environment, they should be taken out, not physically, but they should be exposed to real-world data. For example, data on climate change can be used to impart practical experience amongst our students so that tomorrow they would be capable of finding solutions for climate change by relying on big data and artificial intelligence. Similarly, data on social media usage, which is available, should be employed in the curriculum itself as part of the training process so that students are working on real world data and they are gaining practical experience and practical skills. So if such integration is done, and if data literacy is seamlessly integrated into our education system, then we can truly prepare our future workforce. They can be future ready. They would be ready to adopt the digital world that we are entering under the fourth stage of the industrial revolution. Medical students can be exposed to patient data, how to interpret patient data and how to optimize operations in hospitals, how to provide better treatment. Similarly, students of arts and humanities can also employ data analysis, and use AI tools for research. And of course, in engineering, there are numerous, endless applications. So this practical experience is what should be imparted to our students. Is that clear? Now, how can we do this? How can this be done effectively? Apart from classroom training, which is done as part of the curriculum, there should be greater emphasis on using newer tools of education, including online tools and online certification programs. Because not every college, not every university would be equipped to impart the right knowledge. They may not have the resources, they may not have good educators, right? So this is where the online medium of learning has tremendous potential. It is a disruptive technology. From anywhere in the country, the best of teachers can become available. The best course, the best curriculum becomes available. Correct? So using such tools, online tools of learning, online certification programs, students can be given wider exposure to different softwares, different machine learning algorithms, right? And at least develop a basic understanding of how data can be applied in different industries, in different sectors. As I was mentioning, even in agriculture, students of agriculture science, they would need basic data knowledge, basic data skills, so that they can apply the data and optimize our agricultural systems. So this is non-negotiable. Tomorrow, if you want to find a good job, whether you're an engineer, a doctor, a farmer, doesn't matter. You need to have basic data literacy at least. That is what will make you employable. That is what will make you future ready to drive the growth of the Indian economy. So ensuring that we maintain the employment rates and we prepare our workforce, we need to prioritize data literacy in our education system itself. That is the essential argument that the writers are making. So upskilling is also critical for those who are already employed. Now, this is not just for students who are still in colleges. This applies even for those who already have a job. Tomorrow, you will become outdated because generative AI today can perform almost every single task, from writing code to writing scripts to even producing very realistic images and visuals. Generative AI is taking the world by storm. So tomorrow, if you want to ensure that you retain your job and not replaced by an AI tool, you need to upgrade, you need to upskill yourself. The Upskilling Evolution Report has confirmed that 58% of employees believe data literacy is critical if they have to survive in the job market. Is that clear? So based on all these pointers, you can highlight why data literacy is crucial in the coming years and how we need to promote this constantly in our education system. This should become part and parcel of your daily learning. Is that clear? This is not just a choice. This is a necessity for the future. Kindly remember this assessment. Learning AI tools or understanding a basic data analysis is no longer a choice. It's not just a specialization. It will become a basic skill necessary in every sector and segment. And this is something you can't miss out on. So if you're aware of all these pointers, these arguments, any question asked on this, I think you should be able to write a good answer. So let's quickly look at a practice question. Data literacy is not merely a skill that's nice to have, but a necessity in preparing students for the future. Examine the statement. So I'll not be discussing this question because I want you guys to experiment with this. I have gone in the right order of the introduction, body and conclusion when I was explaining the topic. So please go back, watch the last 10-15 minutes again, take down the key pointers and try to build an answer on your own, right? You need to become more independent in answer writing. Write an answer and post them in the comment section. I will definitely try to take a look at your answers. Now let's look at article number 3. We had a very important editorial related to the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, UAPA. This is India's primary law against terrorism. It was initially brought out in 1967 to deal with any unlawful activities that posed a threat to national integration, to national territory and sovereignty. That was the initial purpose of the law when it was enacted in 1967, to prohibit unlawful activities and to provide strict penalties, punishments for any unlawful activity which is seditious, which could threaten the country's unity, integrity and sovereignty. Later, UAPA has been amended repeatedly and it has been provided with features to counter terrorism. It has anti-terror provisions as well, and today it is the primary anti-terror law in the country. Now, this law is in the news again. It's a very controversial law because recently a very popular and controversial activist and writer, Arundhati Roy, was in the news with regard to UAPA. Many of you would have heard about Arundhati Roy. I know many of you would have mixed opinions about her. Right? She has been a controversial writer, controversial activist, but nevertheless a Booker Prize winner as well. So Arundhati Roy and also another eminent activist from Kashmir who was once the professor of Kashmir University, Sheikh Shaukat Hussain. Both these individuals have been charged under various provisions of the law, under CRPC, under UAPA, and recently the required grant has been obtained from the competent authority to start prosecution against these individuals, against these activists. The Lieutenant Governor of Delhi has granted the approval to begin prosecution against Arundhati Roy and the professor, the former professor, because they were charged under the seditious laws. Initially, they were charged under the Code of Criminal Procedure, under CRPC, for inciting violence, for inciting hatred against the country. Back then, the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi had granted the approval to prosecute them. And recently, the grant has been given to prosecute them under UAPA as well, which is the anti-terror law of the country. Now, both Arundhati Roy and the former professor of Kashmir University, they are facing these criminal charges because of a speech that they delivered in 2010 in the context of the Kashmir issue. The then Manmohan Singh government was trying to find a solution to the Kashmir issue to address the ground level problems in Kashmir. So the then UPA government under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was engaging with the civil society, with the political leaders and the entire spectrum in J&K. So during this outreach by the central government, activists like Arundhati Roy, they delivered few controversial speeches which attracted this particular complaint, eventually which was turned into a FIR. Initially, the then UPA government was not looking to prosecute them because it was seen as part of their right of free speech and expression guaranteed under Article 19 to express their dissent in a peaceful manner. Because their statements did not lead to any kind of violence or any incitement to violence immediately. There was no immediate security threat as such. They were just dissenting with the views of the government. And the Delhi police did not press charges against the two individuals. But later, a High Court intervened and pushed the police to file an FIR. And under the current government, these charges have been followed more seriously, and now the grant for prosecution has been obtained, not just under CRPC but also under UAPA, which is a very stringent law. Now the concern here is that, is the government using laws like UAPA, which have very stringent provisions, to target dissent, to target criticism? Because a mere speech cannot be seen as a seditious activity. Just a speech delivered by anyone, right? Unless and until it instigates violence, unless and until it is directly responsible for instigation of violence and for leading to a security threat. Your right to free speech and expression is a protected, guaranteed fundamental right under Article 19. But this is where a legal grey area exists, and governments quite often tend to misuse law enforcement agencies and the existing laws to target any kind of criticism or dissent. So here, the article states that, the editorial states that the government is essentially using laws like UAPA to cripple freedom of speech and expression, and it is turning every speech of dissent and criticism into a seditious activity. So under UAPA, there have been many such controversies in the past as well. If you look at the conviction rate under UAPA, it is extremely low. It again shows that many cases filed under UAPA, they are either false to begin with, or the police never had enough evidence, or they did a very shoddy job in their investigation. They failed to collect the adequate evidence to secure the conviction. So low conviction rate is an indicator. But the concern about UAPA amongst activists is that there are very strict provisions under UAPA. It almost becomes impossible to get bail once you're charged with UAPA. Custody is a given, and the police and law enforcement agencies can push for prolonged custody, police custody, not even judicial custody, and bail becomes almost impossible, leading to punishment even before you are held guilty. So there have been many such cases which have triggered a controversy, and it has led to allegations that governments often misuse laws like UAPA and charge the critics and dissenters under these controversial provisions. This cripples your basic right to free speech and expression under Article 19. So editorial is of the viewpoint that you can't brand every speech against the government as a seditious activity. You can't charge those people who are delivering any controversial speech, right? And you can't charge them and accuse them of inciting violence when there is no proof to show that. Unless and until a speech directly contributed to an act of violence, to a direct security threat, you can't bring these charges and essentially intimidate the critics and dissenters. So this sensitive, controversial issue is brought up here in the editorial, and this is not the first time we are looking at a controversy related to UAPA. There have been many such cases where it's been alleged that governments, not just the current government, even previously, governments have often misused laws like UAPA to target dissent, criticism, and essentially to cripple free speech by invoking these stringent laws which are related to security and counterterrorism. Next, we have another editorial on page number 6 related to gender gap and gender equality. Now I feel this is another important article in today's newspaper, because recently the Global Gender Gap Report has been published by the World Economic Forum. So please note down this important fact, very important for your prelims. Who publishes the Gender Gap Report? It is WEF. According to the latest Gender Gap Report, there has been a very slight progress when it comes to gender parity between men and women. So this report tracks certain important indicators, such as whether women have equitable access to education. This is one important indicator. Whether women in a given country, do they have equitable access? Is there high enrollment, high retention of women students in the education system? This is measured. It also looks at political opportunity or political empowerment in a particular country. What is the political representation of women in elected bodies, legislative bodies, and parliament? What kind of political participation do we witness from women? Do they have equitable representation? This is measured as a key indicator. It also measures the participation of women in the labor market, in the labor force. It also looks at opportunities available to women, whether equitable opportunities are available irrespective of gender. So all such indicators are tracked by the World Economic Forum, which publishes the Gender Gap Report. So countries which have the higher ranks, they usually have a score of 90% and above, or at least 85% and above. So essentially on the Gender Gap Report, if hypothetically if a country were to score 100%, it means that there is gender parity between men and women in that country. That is how the index works. If 100% rating is achieved by any country hypothetically, it means that there is gender parity between men and women in that country. So in various measures of gender equality, it shows that there has been progress towards gender parity between both the genders. Now, the highest ranked country on the index is Iceland. Iceland is ranked at the top, the number one country when it comes to gender parity with a score of 93.5%. Is that clear? Now, compare this with the global average. The global average for last year was 68.4%, which means the world is far behind with regard to gender parity. When it comes to achieving gender equality and gender parity, the world has many steps to cover. So from 68.4%, there has been a glacial progress, a very slow incremental progress, and the score has improved by 0.1%. So it's a very minor progress that the world has achieved with regard to gender parity, from 68.4% last year to 68.5% this year. But nevertheless, it is some kind of progress with regard to gender parity. But what is India's performance? That is what is relevant for us. Now, India's performance on the latest report is concerning because India's ranking has dropped by 2 positions. India has slipped to 129th rank out of 146 countries that were evaluated. In the previous report, India was ranked at 135. This had improved to 127. So over the last couple of years, India had shown significant improvement. From 135, we had jumped to 127. And now we have slipped again to 129, which means gender parity has declined in the country. The gap between the two genders has widened, at least in certain cases. So that is the key finding of the gender gap report. Now, if you look at where India underperformed, especially in education and political empowerment, this is where the gender gap has increased. There has been a small decline in education sector and with regard to political empowerment and representation. But there has been a slight improvement with regard to economic participation of women, especially in the labor force, and also the availability of opportunities to women. There has been a slight improvement on these 2 indicators, but a decline on the other 2 indicators. So this clearly points out that India has a lot of catching up to do. If you look at labor force participation rate, it's just at 45.9%. Several reports have repeatedly pointed out that fewer and fewer women are being employed. Fewer women are getting opportunities in the labor market. And more importantly, social factors are playing a big role. In patriarchal orthodox societies, after marriage, women are expected to stay at home and do all the household chores, right? There are restrictions on women from stepping out of the house or in taking up a job, right? This may not be the case in your household, but that is the reality in large parts of India, both in rural and urban India. So these social factors play a critical role as well, which denies equal opportunities to women. It discourages women from participating equally in the economy. It prevents the girl child from accessing education, from remaining in the school or in the college. So essentially, women face several unequal opportunities, disadvantages, which widens the gender gap. Now look at the literacy rate and the difference between men and women. There is a 17.2 percentage point difference. If you take the literacy rate of men in the country and compare that with literacy rate of women, there is a gap of 17.2%, which is very significant. That too with a country with the size of India's population, with 140 crore people, 1.4 billion people. Imagine how wide the difference is. Imagine how millions of women and the girl child are denied equal opportunities, equal access to education. This is where changes have to be brought about through the intervention of the government. We have several important schemes, from Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao to various healthcare related schemes, women empowerment schemes, women reservation in the parliament. Recently the bill has been brought out, but it is yet to come into force. But if you look at the recent Lok Sabha election results, that itself is an indicator of declining women participation in the political space. Compared to the previous Lok Sabha, the number of women MPs in the current newly elected Lok Sabha, there has been a decline, a significant decline. Around 800 women candidates contested in the election. Can you imagine just 800 women candidates out of the hundreds of constituencies that we had? And the number of women elected to Lok Sabha this time is just 74 compared to 78 in the previous Lok Sabha. So out of 543 seats, only 74 MPs are women. So this highlights the significant gap, the glaring gender gap when it comes to political representation and political empowerment. So unless and until the Women's Reservation Act gets enforced, and unless and until 1/3 seats are reserved for women in the Lok Sabha and in legislative assemblies, this number is unlikely to change. There are challenges for women when it comes to employment, when it comes to economic opportunities. So these are the issues that need to be tackled to bridge the gender gap in India. So that is what we understand from this important editorial. Now let's quickly move on towards the prelim section and take a quick look at the small articles in today's newspaper. We had an article on the front page itself related to history and art and culture. The article is referring to Prerna Sthal, which has been inaugurated in the Parliament complex, in the new Parliament complex. I'm sure all of you know that we have shifted to a new Parliament, right? And in the old Parliament building, if any of you have visited the old Parliament, you would have noticed that around the Parliament complex, there were some very, very important statues of historical figures. From the legendary statue of Mahatma Gandhi to the statue of B.R. Ambedkar, and to the other statues of many Indian leaders, from Basavanna to others. These statues have symbolized India's freedom struggle and India's rich cultural heritage and civilizational heritage. These statues in the Parliament complex, they have been the sites of protest by the opposition parties. Opposition parties have used the statues of these leaders, sat under the statues protesting against the government and holding the executive accountable. But now the government has shifted these statues from the old Parliament complex to the new complex at a place called Prerna Sthal. The government says it was a necessary move to make it easier for the tourists to witness all the statues, because previously the statues were widely distributed in a large space. So now they've all been brought together in one central place, and tourists who are visiting the Parliament can easily get a look at all the important statues of these historical figures. Right? So the government says that is the only reason behind relocating the statues to Prerna Sthal. But however, opposition parties are not buying it. Opposition parties are critical. They are saying that the government never consulted the opposition when such a big change was being done in the Parliament. So when the inauguration of Prerna Sthal was done by the Vice President yesterday, opposition parties boycotted the inauguration event. The allegation of opposition parties is that this shows disrespect to our historical figures and leaders who played a pivotal role in our freedom movement. Opposition parties also allege that the government is taking away these protest sites and turning them into tourist sites in order to cripple the opposition, in order to prevent the opposition from using the statues for protests. So this is alleged to be a violation of Article 19 again, the right to free speech and expression. Opposition exists for a reason. The reason why you need a strong opposition is to hold the government accountable, to ensure there are checks and balances. So such allegations have been raised. Let's not enter into the political controversy that is irrelevant for us. Just remember what is Prerna Sthal, why was it in news, and where is it exactly located. Those basic details are more than sufficient. Because looking at yesterday's paper, any such question can be picked from current affairs. For example, yesterday there were such factual questions. There were questions on books and authors, the books written by Dr. Shankar, right? There were very factual, straightforward questions from many different subjects. So it's better to be aware of all these developments that are happening around us. Similarly, from geography, if you saw the question paper yesterday, there were questions on rivers, tributaries, right? The geographical aspects of a river. So today, there is an image on the front page of the Hindu that refers to the Beas river in Himachal Pradesh. You can see tourists taking part in rafting in the Beas River. So I think it's an opportunity to talk about the Beas River, its course, its trajectory, its significance, and understand the geographical features, so that if there is any question on this, you should be in a position to answer that. So let me provide the basic points. I want you guys to make a note of this. The Beas River is part of the Indus River Basin. It's one of the 6 major rivers which are part of the Indus River Basin. You have Indus, Jhelum, Chenab, which largely flow through Pakistan. Partly they flow through India, which are the western rivers of the Indus Basin. Then you have the 3 eastern rivers of the Indus Basin, Ravi, Beas and Satluj. So where does Beas River originate? It originates near the Rohtang Pass in Himachal Pradesh over here in the Himalayan ranges. At the southern end of the Pir Panjal range, very close to the source of the Ravi River. This is where the Beas River takes birth. It flows down from the Rohtang Pass through the Himalayas, crosses the Doladar range and enters Punjab at Harike, where a very important barrage has been built. The Harike barrage diverts part of the Beas River to feed the irrigation canals in Punjab. The irrigation canals, which are critical for farming in Punjab, receive water supply from the Beas River after the waters are diverted at Harike through the Harike barrage. And please remember that the entire Beas River flows within India. It flows entirely within Indian territory. It joins the Satluj. It eventually joins the Satluj when it enters Punjab at Harike. Is that clear? You can see the course here. Beas flows down from Himachal Pradesh, flows through Punjab and joins the Satluj, and then enters Pakistan over here. Eventually, it will drain into the Arabian Sea as the other Indus rivers. The entire Indus water system eventually drains into the Arabian Sea. Now, there are some important pointers about the Beas River, historical, political and geopolitical pointers. Historically, the Beas River finds a mention in the Vedas and also in the Mahabharata. That is something you should be aware of. Along with the Saraswati and the other Indus rivers, the Beas River finds a reference in ancient Hindu texts. It is also of great historical significance because Beas River in a way stopped the march of Alexander the Great towards his conquest of India. The Greeks who were marching towards the east, right, their eventual goal was to occupy India. But Alexander's invasion was halted at the Beas River because his troops were exhausted by then. They had mutinied. They had rebelled against Alexander. You might have heard of this legendary story where Alexander shut himself in the tent for 3 days. He didn't even come out because he was upset, angry about the mutiny of his troops. Eventually, he conceded and he decided to retreat from here with complete withdrawal and with his desire never being fulfilled. Right? So, Beas River in a way stopped the advancement of the Greek troops under Alexander. And also there are some important hydroelectric projects such as the Pando Dam, which generates hydroelectric power for the region. And more importantly, it is part of the Indus Water Treaty between India and Pakistan. Indus Water Treaty divides the Indus Basin into western and eastern rivers. The 3 western rivers, Indus, Jhelum, Chenab, they are almost entirely allocated to Pakistan with a limited share for India. India can't divert the Indus, Jhelum or Chenab. We can't utilize the water beyond a certain percentage which is allocated to India. Majority of it is allocated to Pakistan. But the eastern rivers, Ravi, Beas, Satluj, are entirely allocated to India. India gets priority usage rights over Ravi, Beas and Satluj, and only whatever is remaining, only the ecological flow is maintained into Pakistan as per the Indus Water Treaty. So these are some important points that you need to know in order to ensure that you can answer any question on the Beas River. Next, on page 4, we have another article related to art and culture. It's referring to the very popular Hazratbal shrine in Kashmir. The article is not important for us. Just know what is this shrine, where is it located, why is it important. In this image, can you see a structure, a white marble structure which looks like the Taj Mahal? Right? This is the Hazratbal shrine located on the banks of the historic Dal Lake in Srinagar. On the banks of the Dal Lake in Srinagar, you find this beautiful white marble structure, which is none other than the Hazratbal shrine. It is a very sacred site for Muslims, as it is believed that a strand of Prophet Muhammad's hair is preserved at this shrine. So that is what you need to know from this article. Next, on page number 7, we have an article related to the recent tragedy that occurred in Kuwait. If you remember, a few days ago, I discussed the fire tragedy in Kuwait, where almost 49 people were killed and 40 plus were Indian workers. So when this tragedy occurred, we discussed the plight of Indian blue-collared workers in the Gulf countries, in West Asian countries. We spoke about the mistreatment of Indian workers, how they are abused, how they are exploited by the middlemen and as well as by the employers, and how they suffer from harsh living and working conditions in the Gulf countries. Now, the reason why this happens is because of a system, an employment system, a policy called the kafala system. Kafala in Arabic stands for sponsorship. Now, if you have ever applied for a foreign visa, you would know that for certain countries, you need someone to sponsor your visit. Only then you're given visas. For example, let's say you want to visit US or European countries. To get the concerned visas, right, either you need a sponsorer, right, or it could be an employer who's sponsoring you or a relative, or you need to prove that you're just going for tourism purposes. Similarly, in the Gulf countries, in the Arab region, there is a visa system, an employment system, right, called the kafala or sponsorship system. This is part of the immigration laws and labor laws of many countries in the Gulf. In Jordan, in Lebanon, and across the GCC countries, the Gulf Cooperation countries like Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, or even Saudi Arabia, UAE, they all have this system. All these countries mentioned here, they have this system called the kafala system, which is mainly responsible for the abuse and exploitation of migrant workers. So what exactly is this kafala system? Under the kafala system or the sponsorship system, the employer, who is usually a native, is given full control, is given complete control over the employment and immigration status of a migrant worker. Basically, your worker or employer will decide how long your work visa would be valid in these countries. Now imagine there is a poor Indian migrant worker from Kerala who is finding some job in Kuwait or in Jordan or in, let's say, in Oman. Now, their ability to get the work visa and get the employment status and to remain in that country as a migrant worker is entirely dependent on the native employer. It could be a private company or it could be a private individual. They will have full control over the visa status, the migrant work status. So this is what leads to the exploitation of Indian workers and other foreign migrant workers. See, these countries have a shortage of labor. They have a lot of wealth accumulated through petrochemical resources, right? So they don't have enough labor available, as majority of the families here belong to the elite, rich, upper middle class. So to do the basic manual labor from oil industry to construction, real estate, hospitality, they rely entirely on migrant workers. That's why all these countries, they have millions of foreign migrant workers. And they usually come from poor countries, developing countries, from Philippines, from Thailand, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and of course India. In a way, their economy is dependent on migrant workers. If you remember the FIFA World Cup recently hosted by Qatar, even then kafala system was in controversy. It was heavily criticized because the entire World Cup infrastructure was built by migrant workers like Indian workers. Many of them lost their lives, they suffered injuries during these projects, and they were not even treated properly by the Qatari regime. So the kafala system was heavily criticized because the employers often misuse this. They force the migrant workers to live in very horrible conditions. They don't even give them a proper living space. They are segregated from the elite rich classes. There is racism as well. against the migrant workers, especially Indian workers and Pakistani and Bangladeshi workers. They face a lot of discrimination, abuse, exploitation, and it's largely because of this control that employers have over them. So if they confiscate their passport, or if they deny them the work status and revoke the immigration status, they will no longer be able to work in the country. They'll be deported back. So that forces the migrant workers to oblige by the wishes of the employer. That's why they get pushed into human trafficking. That's why they are paid very low wages. They are not even given proper social security or living conditions or salaries. So this incident in Kuwait is a clear indicator of the abuse of the kafala system. Now, this is something India will take up diplomatically. India has always had concern about the kafala system, which affects our migrant workers, especially the blue-collared workers. Next, on page 10, there is a reference to a very huge military exercise that India is planning. The first ever multinational exercise led by the Indian Air Force. See, Indian Navy has conducted multilateral exercises like Milan, Malabar, etc., where multiple navies are brought together and India leads a multilateral naval exercise. But we have never conducted a multinational air exercise led by the Indian Air Force. For the first time, Indian Air Force would be conducting this exercise called Tarang Shakti in August. 10 friendly countries, democratic countries, would be brought together, and it would be modeled on the red flag exercise of the US. The US Air Force hosts a multinational air exercise called the Red Flag. India also participates in it. Recently, in Alaska, when Red Flag exercise was held, Indian Air Force took part in it. So India is going to host a similar military exercise called Tarang Shakti, and close partners like Australia, France, Germany, Spain, Japan, United States, United Kingdom, all these countries are being invited. So up to 10 countries are going to participate. It would be held in 2 phases, one in the southern part of India, one in the western part of India. And this would be the first and the largest multinational air exercise hosted by India. Now, yesterday's question paper will tell you why military exercises can be important. If you have seen the question paper, there was a very easy question on exercise Mitra Shakti, which is an exercise between India and Sri Lanka. You could easily answer this question if you knew about Mitra Shakti being an exercise between India and Sri Lanka, because you could employ the elimination method. So please take a look at previous question papers always, because that tells you what kind of questions are being asked. That sets a boundary for your preparation as well. Now, coming to the last article for today before we close the session, we have this article on page 14 related to India Sri Lanka. Coincidentally, according to the article, the Sri Lankan President Ranil Wickremesinghe has stated that India's Foreign Minister Shankar is going to visit Sri Lanka this week. After the formation of a new government in India, there is an expectation of a high-level visit from India, where India's Foreign Minister is expected to visit Sri Lanka. During this proposed visit, Sri Lanka has said that it will consider few connectivity projects with India, including land-based connectivity. See, India and Sri Lanka have maritime connectivity through Gulf of Mannar and Park Strait. These are the maritime regions that mark the boundaries between India and Sri Lanka. Right, we have decent maritime connectivity from Tamil Nadu and towards northern part of Sri Lanka, towards the Jaffna region. So apart from the sea-based maritime routes that exist, there is a proposed land connectivity which could link the northern part of Sri Lanka, the Mannar region, with southern part of Tamil Nadu. The plan is to connect northern Sri Lanka from Jaffna, from the Mannar region towards southern part of Tamil Nadu, to create a land corridor, a sea bridge essentially, that would link India and Sri Lanka directly. Now, if this proposal takes off, if it is executed, this can be a game changer for South Asia. So Sri Lanka has said that it is open to consider the feasibility of such a project. The project has not started. It has not even been proposed formally. It is still under consideration, because any such project would be extremely challenging. Right? Not just cost-wise, but technically, due to the geographical challenges, it could be a very challenging project to execute. So Sri Lanka has shown openness to explore the feasibility of such a land connectivity project. There is also a proposal to interconnect our power grids, because in the Park Strait region, there are renewable energy projects coming up in Sri Lanka, which are being set up by India's Adani Group. India's Adani Group has won a contract to install offshore wind turbines and offshore solar plants to generate renewable energy. And according to estimates, there could be surplus electricity generated by these renewable energy projects in Sri Lanka, in the Park Strait region. Now, this surplus electricity could be brought to India to meet the deficit in India, thus integrating our power grids as well. So these are some proposed connectivity projects which are likely to be considered during the proposed visit of India's foreign minister. So on this note, I would like to bring my session to an end. I hope you guys have understood all the key points. I hope you have benefited from the session, and if you did, please let me know in the comments. Do press the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a good day.